How is it that the wealthiest country in the world has such a screwed up healthcare system? After 35 years in the healthcare industry, I decided to retire and share my secrets with you. I'm Chuck Melendi, and this is Disruptive Dialogue. Hey everybody, Chuck Melendi with Disruptive Dialogue, and we are on podcast number 6. We are going to talk about the high cost of drugs today. But before we get started, as most of y'all know, I am supposed to be retired, left the corporate world, but this is my new gig. However, I went golfing in a charity golf tournament about a week and a half ago. And if you've ever done a charity golf tournament, you will know that they have games. And so they had the putting green, and me and my buddies were putting, and you hit a bucket of popcorn or something else, or little prizes. And, my golf ball it was like a magnet, went straight towards the bucket of Fireball. And if you're not watching on YouTube, I've got the bucket of Fireball. Yes, all the little shots. And I have to say, I'm so fired up about this podcast today that I think I'm going to start off with a little shot of Fireball. Now, this is how I've taught my 20-year-old girls, 24 and 27, not 20, and their friends how to drink Fireball. So on YouTube, if you're seeing it, you're going to laugh. If you're not, you should check it out. Here we go. Christmas in a bottle. Okay, let's go. So let's talk about the high cost of drugs. I want to bring you back real quick to episode 2, which was Follow the Money. And if you didn't listen to it, basically what we learned is that Americans are getting ripped off when it comes to the U.S. healthcare system. We spend more than twice as much as most developed countries, but our healthcare isn't as good, and that has to do with access and affordability. We also talked that healthcare is not just hurting patients, but it's hurting the American economy. It's hurting our businesses. It is now the second highest cost for businesses across our country, only behind salaries and wages. Hospitals and insurance companies, they're making so much money right now that they are buying physician practices. Huge hospital systems are buying smaller hospitals. And they're always saying, you know what, it's going to make us streamline, it's going to reduce administrative costs. Well, study after study shows that's not true. Whenever all this consolidation happens, what eventually happens is prices go up because they have more monopolistic power. The last thing, in 2023, and I know this was a shocker to a lot of people. Like I said, go to the Google if you don't believe me. In 2023, 7 companies in the U.S. healthcare industry were ranked in Forbes 500, one of the top 25 largest companies in the United States based on revenue. 7 companies. Those 7 combined for $1.7 trillion in sales only in 2023, $1.7 trillion. Of those 7, 5 were insurance companies. The other 2, no, they were not drug manufacturers, although they make a lot of money. The other 2 were drug wholesalers. The bottom line is the insurance companies and their pharmacy benefit managers, they run the system of healthcare in the U.S. They are supposed to keep costs down, but they are beholden to their shareholders. That is who they have a fiduciary duty to, which means that's who their responsibility is to, not to patients. So we are going to get into high drug costs because that seems to be what everybody wants to talk about. But before I go there, I got a taste of my own medicine this week. I went to the dermatologist. You can't see it. My daughter did a little blopping of makeup on my face because I got a big burn mark on my nose because they had to take off, pre-cancer, whatever. But it was hilarious. The medical assistant comes in, and I love my dermatologist. I'm going to give a shout out to Dr. Jennifer Harb at Brandon Dermatology, rock star, and her staff is great. But, they were going to give me a little shot of lidocaine, and then they were going to scrape it and do all this kind of stuff. And I said to the medical assistant, I said, how much is that going to cost? Real quick, everybody, we all need to start to do that. But I asked her, how much is it going to cost? And she looks at me like, I have no idea. I'm like, so I'm going to do this. I don't even know what it's going to cost. She's like, well, if you go to the front desk, you can ask her and she can look into the insurance company and find out what your benefit design is, and then we can know. I'm like, that's part of the problem. It is ridiculous. My daughter Crosby was in Vietnam doing a cross-country trip recently, and she actually got E. coli. It was very scary for parents, even though she's 27 and tougher than I am. But she got super sick. She went to the hospital. They literally gave her a list of all the things they were going to do and what they were going to give her. And by each one, there was a charge. And they said, you have to pay for it by credit card. They paid for it by credit card. They did everything. They gave her the bill, the receipt. She sent it to her international insurance company, and within 2 weeks, she got paid. I digress. Okay, so back. Medical assistant didn't know what it was going to cost for that procedure. So then I'm like, I'm getting older, and my nose, I've gotten a couple veins because I'm drinking a lot of bourbon these days, apparently. Well, Fireball. And, I said, can you have a laser or something? Because I'm going to be doing these podcasts and I got to look pretty for YouTube, blah, blah, blah. She said, sure. And I said, well, how much is that going to cost? $50. I'm like, seriously? To zap the veins on my nose? And there's not that many. Big nose, though. And she's like, yeah, $50. And I'm like, okay, that is how healthcare should be. Not done with this adventure yet. They write a cream that I got to put on for some precancer stuff. I go to the pharmacy. This is great. I go to the pharmacy and I said, hey, I'm here to pick up my cream. And they said, okay. And the girl says behind the counter, so Mr. Melendi, we can either run it through your insurance and it'll cost you $72, or you can pay as a cash patient and it'll be $58. I'm going, wait a minute. So my insurance company, who I pay $1,000 a month for my family in premiums, it costs more than if I'm a cash paying patient and not paying anything? She's like, yes. I'm like, that is effed up. Now, here's what's even worse. Prior to 5 or 6 years ago, she would not be able to tell me that because Florida passed a law. Most people don't realize this, but if you go to a pharmacy, most pharmacies, they have to contract with pharmacy benefit managers. In their contracts is what's called a gag clause. And the gag clause tells the pharmacist you are not allowed to tell a patient if they're going to pay more money for a prescription using their insurance than not using their insurance. A bunch of states, Florida did it 5 or 6 years ago, removed the gag clause. And so now pharmacists can say that. Think about how messed up that is, that the PBMs and the insurers are telling pharmacies, you can't tell patients if they can get the drug for less. So call your legislator. Now, let's get to drug pricing. So I used to laugh, and at my old job, I would talk in front of people, and I'd get up there. I'm like, look, drug pricing, it's like the easy button. Think Target. It's the easy button for the media. It's the easy button for politicians because it's easy to understand. I mean, something's wrong with you, you got to get medicine. Everybody does, whether you have allergies or flu or whatever. You go to the pharmacy. Everybody's used to it. So let's talk about that for a second. The Kaiser Family Foundation, every year they look at all the healthcare costs across the country and they break it down. And it says what percent of spend in the United States is for different parts of healthcare. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the slide right now. If you're not, you can go to my website, which is disruptivedialogue.org, and you can pull these slides up. But basically what you'll see is that retail drugs, so drugs at the retail pharmacy that you see on the corner, count for only 9% of the spend in the U.S. on healthcare. Now, I want to be, real here. If you add in all the drugs that are given in a physician's office or in hospitals, including the retail, it's up to 15%. So think about that for a second. You hear from the media, you hear from politicians, drug prices, drug prices, drug prices. And yes, they're high. They're 15 cents of every dollar spent in the U.S. The biggest spend in the U.S. is hospitals. 1/3 of the money spent in the U.S. is on hospitals. And that is despite the fact that medicines and different type of technologies developed over the last 30 years have reduced the need for hospitalizations. They never have lowered their cost in 35 years. So they are keeping costs inflated up, even though the utilization of it is going down. And then 20% of it is like physicians' offices, which you would expect. And then there's like this 26% other health. That's where your insurers are falling into that little piece of the pie. So before we start to talk about what causes patients to pay so much and who's in charge of that, with any aspect of the healthcare system, I also want to talk about the value. So we're going to talk about pharmaceutical drugs. So let's talk about the value of pharmaceutical drugs. So listen, if you or me, family member, a friend gets sick, you're going to do a couple things. You're going to take them to the hospital. There's value there. You're going to take them to a doctor's office. There's value there. They may have a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant. You may go to a pharmacy and see the pharmacist. You may need a drug or a device or some type of medical equipment. Those are things that you need. It's not like, you know what, popcorn is way too much these days. I'm not going to eat it. If your allergies are blowing up, you're going to go and get some kind of medicine for it. If you're sick, you're going to get medicine. Medicines are one of the key things that we have in our system. And so we need to figure out a way to fix the problem of drug prices going up. So if you go back, you can see the impact that drugs have had on horrific diseases like cancer, AIDS, diabetes. These are diseases that used to be death sentences. These are diseases that would basically debilitate some people. Now you can take these drugs, and some of these diseases are turning into just chronic conditions where you still can have high quality of life. So yes, we need to fix high drug prices, but we need them. Now, do I think that the proliferation of pharmaceuticals, everybody should take it for everything? No, I don't believe that. Live a healthy lifestyle. But when you need a drug, and they do make a big difference in society. Unfortunately, like the rest of the healthcare system, drug prices continue to go up. The challenge that we have in fixing drug pricing in our country is that there are a bunch of companies and industries in healthcare that don't make anything when it comes to drugs. They don't have research and development. They don't create these drugs. But man, they make a ton of money, and they are the middlemen. They are the supply chain, and they have grown exponentially. And we talked about that in the second episode, but we'll touch on it again today. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, to this date, has approved over 32,000 generic drugs. And if you don't know what a generic drug is like a lookalike. It's a copycat. So, you have what you'll hear like brand name drugs or originator drugs. So those are drugs that are brand new, and they have like a patent life of 10 to 17 years so that the company who invested in it, they can get their money back. But after 10 to 17 years on the market, usually, unless there's some shenanigans going around, and we'll talk about that one day, but once they hit the end of their patent life, generics come out. And the companies making the generics, they don't have to spend R&D, so they can make these a lot less expensive. And so there's really good competition, and so all the prices go down. Now, people say, well, that's great, but are they being used? In the United States, and this is in numerous studies out there, and the federal government backs this up, over 90% of the drugs prescribed in the United States are generic. So 9 out of 10 drugs that we use in this country are generic drugs. They're copycat, and they're supposed to be cheaper. Now, you can say, okay, that's fine, Chuck, but we know that drugs are more expensive in the U.S. than outside the U.S. Actually, there's been a lot of discussion and potential laws around importation. And when we looked at importation from Canada, what we found is, and it's also in the literature, and you can Google it, generic drugs are cheaper in the United States than they are in Canada. So you've got 9 out of 10 drugs prescribed in our country are generics. And those generics, on average, are cheaper than they are outside the U.S. So think about that for a second. Now, the story's good when it comes to generics, and we're not going to talk about yet how the insurers and the PBMs can still jack up the price of generics. But let's talk about these brand name drugs, because what's happening is most of the big diseases, like congestive heart failure, they have already got their drugs out there. And so you have manufacturers are going towards more specialized diseases that don't have as big a population, so they charge more money. So if you're talking psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, certain types of cancer, those are situations where a drug manufacturer will come out and they will have a higher priced drug. Now, less than 10% of the prescriptions written in our country are for these specialty drugs, I guess you could call it. So even though only 10% is being prescribed, they account for more than half of the cost of drugs in our country. So that is something we have to pay attention to. So you can say, fine with generics, 9 out of 10, but that's less than 50% of the cost in the country. So what about these brand name drugs? Well, let's talk about that. In 2024, the list price of brand name drugs in the U.S. increased 2.3%. Yeah, 2.3%. And by the way, like anything, cars, nobody pays list price. That's not how this works. So, and you say, well, wait a minute. It only increased 2.3%. That was 1 year. No, honestly, what's happened is for the last 7 years, the net cost of drugs, and the net cost is not list. The net cost is after drug manufacturers negotiate with insurance companies and pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, and the hospitals. They do all these negotiations, and they get discounts and rebates and fees. Guess what that's coming out to? Those discounts, rebates, and fees, which are negotiated from the drug manufacturers, account for more than half of the list price. So the cost to the system, what the insurance companies are paying for it, the pharmacy benefit managers, the hospitals, is less than 50% of the list price, okay? The price increase for those brand name drugs for the last 7 years has fallen, not stayed level, have fallen because the negotiating power of these huge conglomerates, it's greater than the manufacturers, so they're able to get really good deals. And so like I sit back and I go, that's insane. If all these discounts and rebates and fees are being paid to the middlemen, and the middlemen are the ones who are determining what we pay for drugs, why does our cost keep going up? Let me give you an idea. In 2024, the middlemen, the hospitals, the insurance companies, and the pharmacy benefit managers, these are PBMs, and we've talked about it before, and I'll touch on it again. They extracted more than $334 billion from drug manufacturers. Just Johnson & Johnson alone paid $34 billion by themselves, one drug manufacturer. Their revenue was $87 billion. Do the math. Over a third is just to play in the game. That's before a patient ever uses the drug. And so I sit there and I'm like, you know what? When we did the second episode, Follow the Money, and I said, you know what? These insurance companies, these PBMs are making so much money. This starts to tell you why. This is why in 2023, United Health Group made $381 billion. Aetna made $358 billion. And as I said in that episode, if you took the revenue of the 5 biggest drug manufacturers in the world, all 5 of the biggest ones, and combined their revenue, it's less than the revenue of United Health Group and less than the revenue of Aetna. And those two companies don't even make anything. That is insane. So, what you can't see on the podcast, so I'll walk you through it, and what you can see if you go onto the website or you watch on YouTube, is I went to the Drug Channels Institute, and Adam Fine, this guy's a pharmacist, he runs Drug Channels Institute. He is amazing. I'm going to refer to some of his information throughout this talk. But basically, he tracked from 2014 to 2024 the price of drugs. And when I say the price increase. Okay, so you hear, oh my God, inflation, price increases. So I will tell you right now, prior to 2016, drug prices for about a 4-year period were increasing at double digits rate. You're talking in the teens. And there's a reason for that, and that's going to be in another episode because it's way too detailed. But since 2016, the list price increase, remember, nobody pays this, the list price increase of all drugs across the board for pharma increased in the single digits. Once you took away all the discounts, rebates, and fees that they had to pay out to the insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers and the hospitals, there was a negative price increase for the last 7 years. So think about that once again. If the system that names what we pay for drugs, if their cost has been going down for 7 years, why is the cost for us, our out-of-pocket cost, going up? Why do they continue to say, you know what, we have to increase our premiums because drug prices are going up? First off, drugs account for only, what did I say? 15%. So it's only 15% of the pie. Secondly, the cost to insurers and PBMs and hospitals is going down for the last 7 years. So they're full of shit, okay? And you need to know this. If you don't believe me, Google it. It's there. That's why I like to say in my first episode, it was the wake up call. This episode, maybe I should have called it Wake Up Call 2, because I don't think a lot of people understand that this is what's going on. So if the drug prices fall for 7 years, we keep seeing that all the premiums, everything keeps going up. That is insane. Now, I told you that the drug manufacturers don't set the price for patients. We don't. So think about it for a second. When you go to a grocery store and you're going to get some food, you are not paying the price that the farmer charged the food wholesaler, or a company that makes, cereal. They're not selling direct to you. Drug manufacturers don't sell direct to you. So just like a grocery store, if a product wants to be carried by the grocery store, just be in the grocery store for you to find, they're going to have to pay some kind of incentive to the grocery store. So same thing with drugs. If a drug company wants their drugs to be available on what's called a formulary, which is a list of drugs, that when a physician does a diagnosis for a patient and he says, you know what, you have this disease, you need this drug. Well, if drug manufacturers do not pay insurance companies and hospitals and the pharmacy benefit managers money, they won't carry their drugs usually on their formulary. Okay, so that's number one. We're having to pay just to be on the formulary. Now, in a grocery store, when you walk around, at the end of the aisle, you see these products, and at eye level, you see products. Those products aren't there on accident. The different vendors, they are negotiating for those prime spots. So they're having to pay the grocery store to be in a great spot where they might be seen by a shopper. Same with pharmaceutical drugs. If we want a physician, when a physician says, you know what, and let's use arthritis. A physician says, you know what, you have rheumatoid arthritis. I'm going to use this drug. If that company did not pay enough money, the insurer or the pharmacy benefit manager will say, sorry, you have to use this other drug before you use that drug because that's our preferred drug. Their preferred drug because that manufacturer paid them more money. That's where these hundreds of billions of dollars are going. So the manufacturer is paying this money so that their drugs will be available for a physician to prescribe, and so that a physician doesn't have to use other drugs before they can use your drug. So it's a bidding war, basically. So we're giving all these concessions, but at the end of the day, your coinsurance, your copay, what the cost of the drug is, we have nothing to do with that. It's crazy. Now you say, well, you know what? Then we should just look at it and figure out how are we going to fix this? Well, it's more difficult than that because these middlemen, the insurers and the PBMs, they have told the government, look, we can't tell you what our cost is and how we come up with these prices because that's proprietary information. That is trade secrets. And they've hidden around that or behind that. And that's complete bullshit. Our legislators need to say, you know what? We are bankrupting our country. We are hurting our economy. This is causing inflation. We need to know what the hell is going on. Hell, hospitals, there was a price transparency law in 2023 that was passed, a federal law. They're supposed to put online what their prices are. You know how many hospitals do that 2.5 years later? Less than 20%. You know why? Because the penalties are fines. And all these companies make so much money, a fine is a cost of doing business. What they need to do is they need to say, you know what? If you don't follow this law, we're going to kick you out of the Medicare program. They'll pay attention. Or we're not going to let you sell your commercial insurance in this state or in the country if you don't follow our laws. These are things legislators need to do. Okay, so great article that came out in November of last year by the Wall Street Journal. I told you guys I try to use really legitimate sources, so Drug Channels, Wall Street Journal. And basically, you should look it up. It's November, I think, 26th of 2024. It's the Wall Street Journal, and it said, same drug, 2,200 prices. Yes, the same drug, 2,200 prices. And so basically, what it talks about is that the drugs that we pay in this country fluctuate depending on where you live, what insurance you have, and not even if you have the same insurance, a different design. First off, Medicare Advantage. Okay, so if you don't know what Medicare Advantage is, think about this. People who are over 65, they can choose one of two things. Traditional Medicare, which is administered by the government, also known as fee-for-service Medicare, or Medicare Advantage, and that is basically your insurance companies that the government pays them money to run a privatized Medicare program. Well, in the second episode, we already found out that Medicare did their most recent, or the CBO just did their most recent analysis, and Medicare Advantage beneficiaries cost the government more than 20% more than traditional fee-for-service Medicare that is administered by the government. So as far as the private sector running more efficiently and more cost-effective, no, it's not, because these companies continue to raise their prices and our government continues to pay them. But what this story showed was that Medicare Advantage patients who are in the same insurance plan but live in different states paid wildly different prices for their drugs. The price for a single medication can range in difference by thousands of dollars. The cost is not differential by thousands. Maybe in negotiations, one insurance company gets a little bit better by 1% or 2% than another insurance company, but not by thousands of dollars, and certainly not the same insurance company has a bunch of different prices. They are changing their price where they know they can get more money so they can make more profit. One of the examples that the Wall Street Journal, and they had like 6 different drugs, but a generic drug for prostate cancer is called Zytiga. And what they showed was that Zytiga had one drug had 2,200 different prices across Medicare Advantage plans. So, like I said, it's a generic drug. Like I said, generics should be cheaper. They are cheaper to the plans and the hospitals and the pharmacy benefit managers, but that doesn't always mean it's cheaper for you. What they showed was that generic drug in northern Michigan came in at roughly $815 a month. Then they went to a suburb in Detroit, and it was just over $400. So half of what it was in northern Michigan. Then they went to a couple counties right outside of Lake Michigan. I guess those are wealthy communities, because the cost of that drug, of the same drug that was $400 in Detroit and $800 in northern Michigan, was $3,300 in these counties. $3,300 versus $400 in the same state by the same Medicare Advantage plan. How is this legally happening? I have no idea. And if you go, well, Melendi, we still don't believe you. Read the article. It's the Wall Street Journal. They don't like us, trust me. The article bluntly states that the reason for the huge difference in America's drug supply chain for patients is America's complicated drug reimbursement system, which uses middlemen to negotiate prices. And on that slide, there's a link that takes you to that. So they got into, well, how can they do this? Well, how they do this is these large companies create a pricing patchwork, and they negotiate different prices for different plans. Not only is it confusing for seniors who have to then pay in some areas more money than others for no reason really at all, these wide range of drug prices is also confusing to Medicare. And we are paying the tab for both Medicare Advantage and Medicare. That comes from the U.S. citizens, our taxes. We're paying millions more for these prescriptions because these prices are wildly varying. And this was a generic drug. Remember, they're supposed to be lower. Well, the cost is lower, but they're raising it as much as they want. Heck, if you think about it, the drug's cheaper now. They charge more. They're making a bigger profit. So this is where I get a little annoyed with our government. The last administration, and I try not to get political, but everybody's all excited that, we've got now our administration is going to negotiate with drug manufacturers and lower the price of drugs. Well, first off, pharmacy benefit managers run the Medicare Part D program. And the Medicare Part D program is if you get a drug by mail or you get it outside of the hospital for the most part, that's going to be a Part D medication, okay? The PBMs, they already negotiate those with us. So now the government says, well, we're going to do it again, and that's fine. And so they negotiated with us, and they went after 10 drugs. The problem is that the manufacturers now have to provide their drug at a much lower cost. That was negotiated by Medicare. Congratulations. They didn't put any guardrails on the insurance companies or the PBMs. So basically now, there's no requirements. They have to carry that drug. It has to be on their formulary. But it doesn't have to be preferred. So if they go, well, wait a minute, this was negotiated by the government, and I'm only going to make a couple $100 on it from my rebates and discounts I get from the manufacturer. But if I give them this more expensive drug, I'll make $1,000 on rebate and discounts. I'm going to make them use this one. There's not even a requirement that the drugs negotiated by the government, those are the ones that are preferred by the insurance companies and the PBMs. So guess what? You probably won't see those drugs on all the plans. The second thing that ticks me off is that they didn't really hold down the cost for the insurers and the PBMs. So the one good thing that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, did was it said, okay, starting this year, 2025, and if you have someone over the age of 65, you need to let them know that their out-of-pocket max by law has been capped at $2,000. So what that means is they still have to pay their monthly premiums, okay? That doesn't go away. That doesn't change. But what they are charged in copays or co-insurance can be no more than $2,000. Now, look, the majority of us are not going to hit that $2,000. But if you have drugs that are $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, these specialty drugs, that is a huge advantage for these patients. Now, we always joke about the balloon. If you squeeze the balloon in one place, it's going to get bigger in another. Well, the insurance companies and the PBMs are super smart. They got a ton of lawyers and a ton of MBAs. And they basically said, well, you know what? We're not going to get as much money out of the patient from their copays and co-insurance on these expensive drugs anymore. And the government's going to make us pay a little bit more in that program. So we're going to raise our premiums. And that's what they did. Now, the government said, well, we're going to limit their how much they can raise premiums. That was not accurate. Through research, we found out that there are certain designs, and the basic benefit design, which less than 1% of people use this design, that's limited in how much they can raise their premiums, but not what 99% of the people use. And so what happened last year in 2024, the PBMs and insurers raised the premiums for your prescription drug plans by 40%, 40, because they are not going to make enough money on the out-of-pocket because of this law. Where is the government when we need them to help regulate these for-profit companies? So I've railed on the insurers and the PBMs and the hospitals, and I've talked about these middlemen. Well, that's who they are. So these middlemen are like the insurance companies. This is like Blue Cross Blue Shield. And there's different ones in different states. United, Aetna, Cigna, Humana, these are insurers. PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers, and if you've never heard of them, don't feel bad. Most of Congress didn't know what a PBM was prior to 6 years ago. They have not always been huge, but they have grown over the last 15, 20 years, and for different reasons, and one day we'll go down that rabbit hole. But PBMs are basically like CVS Caremark, Optum Health, or Express Scripts. Now, if you get drugs mailed to you, you've seen one of these because United Health Group owns Optum. That is their PBM. Aetna was bought, the giant Aetna was bought by CVS Caremark, and Cigna bought Express Scripts. Well, these are the PBMs, and think about the name, Pharmacy Benefit Managers. They manage your pharmacy benefit or your drug benefit. And so they're the ones behind a lot of what's going on, and their growth and their profit is unbelievable. Hospital systems, look, we need hospitals, but at the end of the day, their board of directors and their C-suites, they become profit-driven and revenue-driven. And, not all hospitals are the same. We need hospitals, but the physicians, the nurses, the pharmacists, the techs, everybody working on the front line of hospitals are doing a tremendous job. Their workforce is being cut down, and the C-suite keeps making more money. And a lot of these hospitals are going into not-for-profit status, and the government needs to look at that as well. So at the end of the day, it's crazy. But how and I don't know how they do it because I haven't looked behind the curtain. I didn't have this chance. I just negotiated with the insurers and PBMs, but how they come up with all these different pricing schemes, I don't know how they do it. I don't know why they're allowed to do it, but there is no incentive for them not to do it. These are publicly traded companies, and their responsibility is to their shareholders to drive revenue, not to you and me and other patients. That needs to change. Now you say, Chuck, okay, say this is all true. I'm sorry, Johnson & Johnson, that's a huge company. Merck, Pfizer, Lilly, they're huge companies. Don't tell me that they can't go toe-to-toe in negotiations with these companies when they're negotiating drugs. That used to be the case. There is no doubt about it. I mean, we used to, prior to 2010, when I was doing this and negotiating with them, we literally, strategy at J&J at the time, and this was everybody else in the industry, was we would go to the insurers and we would say, you know what? We are going to give you 1% to 3% for your admin fee, to handling all the administrative crap. You put all of our drugs on formulary and everybody else's drugs on formulary because that decision should be between the physician and the patient. We are not going to pay you to prefer a drug, our drug or any other drug. Well, unfortunately, around 2010, one of the big manufacturers gave in and they paid more to be preferred over other drugs. And when that happened, all the insurers and all the PBMs called manufacturers and said, well, that's fine. You don't have to give us more money, but your drug will be used after this manufacturer's drug. And that's how the snowball started. But these companies have gotten so big that the three big PBMs, they have 80% of the U.S. population, over 250 million people. Their prescriptions run through CVS, Express Scripts, and Optum. If you're a drug manufacturer and you don't do what one of these three insurers and PBMs say in contracting, you could lose tens of millions of customers or a third of the country. That is not palatable. That can't be done. So look, the system is complicated and it's shrouded with secrecy. And that is a strategy that they have done. And I talked about comparing it to a grocery store. And look, at the end of the day, drug prices in grocery stores, you can say, okay, you get paid to be in the grocery store or on the formulary, you get paid to be preferred. But if you don't like a grocery store and they charge too much money, you can say, you know what, I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm going to go down the street. Well, you can't do that because you have your insurance plan and you have them for a year. Or you can say, you know what, I'm not going to eat chicken anymore. I'll start to eat tuna fish because I can't afford chicken. Well, if you're sick, you can't go, well, I'm not going to take my drug anymore. I'm going to take a different drug. We don't have those options. So we're in between a rock and a hard place. And the media needs to wake up, and the legislators need to wake up, and they need to take care of this. So look, I'm going to wrap this up with a couple takeaways from this episode. First off, remember, generic drugs, which are copycat drugs, which are 9 out of 10 drugs prescribed in our country, are cheaper than the generic drugs in Canada. Brand name drugs are more expensive, but their cost to the system, the net price, has been going down for 7 years. And you hear them say, we're negotiating to have more savings. Well, savings for who? Because I don't think patients are getting those savings. I had Dr. Maddie Feldman on recently, and like she said, these middlemen, and this is a physician, she was not a manufacturer, she was a physician. These middlemen, they tell all of us who can use drugs, who can use which drugs, when they can use their drugs, and what for. And they are not the prescribers. How is this happening? So look, we know that this is a major problem. We know it needs to be fixed. And I've said this to you at the end of all my episodes. I can tell you all this stuff. You can get mad. What I hope you do are a couple things. You need to take action. Share this podcast with friends that you know. I'm trying to keep it so that everybody can understand what is happening, because we all need to understand. If you know anybody in the media, reach out to them. Tell them to listen to the podcast, or tell them this is crazy. Or if you know a legislator, reach out to your legislator and say, why are you letting these insurance companies and these pharmacy benefit managers and these hospitals break the laws that you're passing? Why are you letting them hurt not only patients, but our economy and inflation in our country and making us less competitive? This is crazy. 7 companies made over $1.7 trillion last year in the U.S. healthcare system. It is out of control. I believe in capitalism, but I think this is more like a monopoly. So that being said, once again, thanks for your time. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Have a good day and drink some Fireball.